This is the Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 33, Katatonia, part 1.
Sleeping, dreaming of my bride. You just heard In Silence and Shrine from Katatonia's first full-length record,
Dance of December Souls.
This is the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark Rudolph.
And I'm Jason Hundy. And this sort of feels weird. This is kind of a cathartic, kind of a long time coming, I think, for most of the people that are pretty familiar with us on a personal level. Kind of most of our close friends. I think they've just sort of been wondering, so when are you guys going to do the Katatonia podcast? Because, that's got to be coming down the road. And here we are for the holidays. We're celebrating Thanksgiving the only way we know how, with
bleak and morose way.
Bleak, sorrow. Yeah, exactly. Joyless future of, everything. So, oops, I need to get another stool here.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. Now I'm down below. But anyways, this is a Requiem Metal Podcast, and we hope that you've been... Oh, we got a nice one there. We hope that you've been kind of tuning in and stuff like that. But Katatonia is, again, this amazingly unique band from just what you heard there, and just a glom of different sounds. And for a Swedish band to be playing something like this, it was really kind of unheard of at the time. Mm-hmm. And the thing that you heard in that song in particular, and we're going to talk a lot more about this here in a second, is of course the influence of the Peaceful Three. The My Dying Bride, Anathema, and especially
Paradise Lost.
Yeah, the
I think the guitar tone that Gregor McIntosh kind of established on the first, at least the first two Paradise Lost records, was kind of the blueprint that Anders, the guitarist for Katatonia, kind of picked that up and tried to make it his own.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And kind of surpassed what McIntosh ever would do with that sound.
Yeah. I mean, and we were kind of remarking in terms of what other bands have we ever heard that have kind of done the style that Katatonia will kind of, make uniquely theirs, and especially in the early era, and specifically, I guess, the Brave Murder Day kind of Sounds of Decay kind of era. And the only thing we could recall is that final track from Icon, from Paradise Lost.
Yeah, you get just a glimmer of that.
In Christianum, I think it was called. And again, it's just that sort of those minor tone, like disharmonic, really like...
a lot of repetition to it as well.
And, I've heard different hardcore bands, Botch kind of used a little bit of that in the C. Thomas Howell, but it's again, just this, fairly, just totally bizarre sound. And I don't know if that's because of the circumstances surrounding that record, which we'll get into later, in terms of the production and things like that. But I think for me, and I don't know how you feel about this, Katatonia has always been number one. There are bands that sort of come real close. I know for you, Paradise Lost, and for me, probably Anathema. Just they're just a notch below Katatonia for some reason. I don't know if it's consistency of catalog, that I really feel like every choice that Katatonia's ever made in their career was like the right one. Almost.
Well, and they never make the easy choice either. I mean, they started out, they're almost like image-wise, they're almost a black metal band. The first record looks like a black metal album cover. Everybody's dressed up in corpse paint with
the
knives
lyrics and stuff, which we'll talk about, like Without God and some of that stuff coming up. But.
And then Dance December Souls come around, and you look at the cover, and I'm like, wow, that looks like a Venom live record or something.
Yeah, it's a very Venomish cover with like sort of these purple clouds and
and just pictures of the guys
superimposed faces. Yeah, I think I've seen a new cover on the reissues that's a lot classier and a lot more kind of Katatonia-esque.
Yeah.
So, but we have, of course, the original versions on No Fashion Records. But yeah, it is. It's the decisions that they made, especially when they decided to kind of cut out some of the metal, I guess, and discourage ones and stuff, was a fairly unpopular decision for a lot of metal bands at that point. It could have been career suicide for a band that sort of had less talent than these guys and less musical vision, but they did it right when death metal was at its glut. Everybody thought, what else can possibly happen with this stuff? And we were kind of talking about the fact that, and maybe this is why there is more of a personal connection with Katatonia, is that I feel like we followed their musical progression kind of went along with sort of our personal musical progression. When Jonas, as a songwriter, was sort of not shunning metal, but he was sort of bored. He was looking for other influences. Yeah, he was kind of bored by that. I think that's a time when you and I and some of our friends were getting into the same kind of stuff that Katatonia was, the Slints, the Will Oldhams, the Red House Painters, the Jeff Buckleys, and then you and I even went into jazz and some other kind of territories, and then we sort of renaissanced in about the mid 2000s, about 2004, 2005, we kind of came back to, some of the older, heavier stuff that we had maybe ignored in our past, the deicides, the suffocations and stuff.
Candlemass, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's sort of funny because that's right around the time that I feel like these guys glommed on with Bloodbath and that, and so they kind of returned to some of their early roots of extreme metal.
Well, yeah, all these guys they're roughly my age, like early 30s kind of age too, so it's... Yeah, we always kind of had the same kind of like musical trajectory.
Yeah, and I think that's just part of that personal connection. I felt that way with Anathema as well, and maybe you probably felt that way with Paradise Lost. You sort of have been kind of on the musical journey with them all along.
Yeah.
But anyways, we should kind of get back to the lineup, just to introduce them. This is going to be the first of a two-part show that we're doing because, of course, being that Katatonia is so near and dear to us, we didn't want to leave out any era or sort of leave any stone unturned, I guess.
Yeah, I think our last two-parter was the Enslaved episode, which was could turn people off. And the catalogs are so diverse, stick around for the whole two-parter.
Absolutely. And if you have never heard the old stuff, this is a wonderful opportunity. I mean, I feel like there's probably a lot of younger listeners who only know really from Discouraged Ones Up, and they might even know not even know that album. They might
just Viva Emptiness and Great Cold Distance or something.
Exactly. I mean, the newer stuff sort of has its own kind of dark vibe, I guess, more of a Deftones kind of feel, or I mean, we'll get into that in the second show. But this early stuff, let's talk about, I guess, the Peaceful Three. And some of that kind of stuff, and where you guys initially discovered, I guess, Katatonia and kind of putting that into...
remember, tell you the truth. I remember picking up, this must have been 95 or 96 at Milwaukee Metal Fest. It used to be this was, pre-internet,
sure,
or where it was, easily accessible to get stuff. Went to the Wild Rags booth and picked up, the first... Katatonia the Revival.
Okay.
Found Behemoth and Gorgoroth and some other stuff as well. I think, and that's I know we heard them before that, but I for the life of me don't remember when.
You don't remember where? Did you guys get service from No Fashion at this time? Would you have gotten this in the mail?
We probably got this through Relapse mail order or something like that.
So, and it probably was...
Chances are we heard about it from some fanzine like Ultimatum or Slayer or something like that.
Yeah, or Dan Zadar or someone who, you guys were kind of connected with.
I think Chris probably got some through Dan Zadar through tape trading.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I can only imagine, Dance of December Souls shows up. At this point, you've heard Gothic, you've heard Serenades, you've heard, the early Bride stuff, As the Flower Withers and Turn Those to Swans and stuff. There's part of me that says maybe when you first heard this, this is cool, but it never...
This album is, I think it's...
You wouldn't have gotten that they were going to turn into what they turned into from this record, because it is so sort of traditionally into the sort of peaceful doom metal kind of style with these sort of black metal kind of, sprinklings throughout. I didn't get Dance of December Souls until I think after I had Discouraged Ones. I Break Murder Day, so this was an album that it took me a while to kind of get into because when I put it on, it didn't sound like the Katatonia that I kind of was familiar with, And if I wanted this type of doom metal, I would always kind of maybe go back to, early Anathema or Bride or whatever. But I think in hindsight, this is an album that really gets ignored, and I think is kind of a diamond in the rough and really a unique gem because it's a Swedish band, so there's these sort of Swedish sensibilities that are going in, these kind of melodic overtones and things.
Yeah.
And the black metal thing, so there's a higher level of darkness than anything that Anathema or Bride or Paradise Lost ever did, but yet it's totally in that doom metal vein.
They almost bring in the misery factor, like Cathedral, the first Cathedral record.
Sure. I mean, it kind of has that sort of emptiness kind of stuff. In the main guys that make up Katatonia at this point is Jonas Renske and Anders Nystrom. Nystrom. Yeah, we need Chris for our Swedish pronunciation.
Actually, I believe it's Jonas.
Is it Jonas, not Jonas?
I've heard it pronounced that way. I prefer Jonas. I think it sounds more exotic. But,
it's kind of like the last episode.
It's the opposite of a Spanish name or something.
Sure, it's like we were debating a couple episodes back about how to pronounce Josh Homme's last name. So,
or Hame.
Yeah, Hame. Yeah, so it's to you. It's in the imagination. I of the beholder. And they kind of make up the original lineup for the most part.
And they've always been the creative force behind the band. I don't believe any other outside of a couple things here and there, that even look at the newer records, none of the other band members really have much input. I think it's just kind of those two guys.
And Anders is the guitar player, and Jonas is the vocalist, sometimes bassist at times, but mostly drummer.
Yeah.
I think Anders actually played some of the bass early on, I think on the Revival EP.
I think so.
And then on Dance of December Soul, they bring in
Le
Huke, which actually on this record, his name is Azrafiel Wing.
Great name.
You got me. It's pretty funny because they're using sort of black metal names on this first record. Blackheim.
Jonas used to be Lord Seth.
Yeah, or on this Lord Renske.
Oh, okay.
So
the top hat and a dagger. Yeah.
Yeah, what can you say?
They're all young ones.
They're young, and this is the time when black metal was kind of the hip thing to be. Now they're not wearing corpse paint or anything like that. Did you ever see pictures of them in corpse paint, like off Revival?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they were.
We ran in Rickman magazine, I believe.
Okay,
and there's that great one from For Funerals to Come EP where they've got the
guy with the top.
There's actually another shot of that. That's where Jonas has a top hat, and the other two guys have like two daggers, and they're standing like in a crossing.
Oh my gosh!
Isn't this the time when like Dimmu Borgir was sporting the top hat and stuff too?
This is pre-Dimmu top hat. So I think Dimmu stole the top hat idea from Katatonia. So.
Oh, it looks like he has the Anders has lawn shears. Like they're going to go do some gardening.
Yeah. That's right. And actually, Lehuche looks like a friend of ours who used to host a metal radio show with me called The Furnace. Ryan Gregory. So if you're out there, Ryan Gregory, we're owing to you somewhere. But these are the main two guys, and they'll be the consistent lineup throughout the whole band career. And we'll talk about when they kind of start to add some newer, more permanent members down the road. But we have no idea where Lehuke went. He just sort of disappeared off the planet.
James Bond villain now.
Yeah. And we don't have internet access at our fingertips to do any kind of this great research. But we're going to turn things back to Dance of December Souls because, like I said, I think this is a record that kind of gets ignored, and it really probably needs a little bit more of the, a little more emphasis and a little bit more awareness for people out there that have maybe heard Brave Murder Day but haven't heard this.
Yeah. This is kind of one of their struggle records too. They have one of these not every 2 or 3 records where they're just kind of treading on what they know, and they're throwing a little bit of
you can tell they're thinking somewhere beyond this record,
but they really don't know where they're going yet. It's kind of a transition record, I think.
And one of the two songs that we're going to play, the second, Without God, was originally on the Revival, the first EP that they started out with. And in particular, you like this version better because you said that there was some kind of double bass kind of things, and the drumming was more dynamic. And
yeah, the original version's fairly sparse, but yeah, this other one, and plus, just the drum production is really odd. It was really snappy, and it almost had like a weird, like a helmet vibe, but kind of dialed in differently, just with how like sharp all the drums were on it.
And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that this was recorded in Unisound Studios by one Dan Swano of Edge of Sanity and several other band fame. And I think back when we did the Edge of Sanity podcast many moons ago, I think episode number 2, we mentioned his dynamic production stuff that he had done, the dissection stuff and some of that, Opeth and Katatonia for sure. And he informs it, and I think he does some of the keyboards as well. And he
does.
What's his code name?
De Dissera.
De Dissera, which we have no idea what that means or why. But anyways, this is a really interesting record. If you're not familiar with it, do kind of pay attention and kind of see where these elements of Katatonia that are going to kind of play out later start to pop in. We're going to open things up with kind of a short intro, which kind of bleeds into the first kind of full-length track. The intro is called 7 Dreaming Souls, and then we get into Gateways of Bereavement, and then Without God, which is the song that again, don't be shocked if you've heard Katatonia. There's some overtly kind of, I guess you could say, satanic black metal attempts at lyrics here, and it's kind of, again, these guys are 18, 19 years old. They're young. They're trying to be as evil as possible, and so hopefully it doesn't chase you.
You'll still hear definitely that whole kind of thread of dread and like that whole morose tone that that they've kept up through basically their entire career.
Yeah,
they found a way to keep that just like utter sadness kind of stuff, but not just dwell on it or make it seem. It's not like goth metal where you're like crying in your chai tea or whatever. This is like really like, and then we see this back in their in some of their like later on influences with like Red House Painters and Slint. All these bands are really kind of grim when you think about it.
Sisters of Mercy, The Cure. I mean, even though The Cure The Cure is like goth, but it's like smart goth. I mean, like
it was like before what we typically think of as Hot Topic goth,
exactly. They were never kind of intending that, and those are the bands that really inform, you know, the songwriting of Katatonia. And whereas, like, I think a lot of the lyrics are sort of still very abstract at this point.
Yeah.
Where Jonas will do, especially when they kind of go clean, let's say, is he sort of starts to personalize the stuff. I think a lot more. And that adds a new kind of dynamic nature to the band, which we'll get into later. So enjoy Seven Dreaming Souls, Gateways of Bereavement, and Without God. You just heard Without God and Gateways of Bereavement from Katatonia's Dance of December Souls. And we should mention that the Dance of December Souls was put out in 93. And kind of where they go after this is actually something that, if you're a longtime listener of Requiem Metal Podcast, you've actually heard where they go after this. They did a couple of tracks for the War compilation, which we heard back in episode 12 or 11 ago, or something like that. Yeah. And so, again, not that we're skipping, but it's kind of why retread over the same material we've kind of played before. But those are both really interesting tracks because you hear a lot more kind of goth stuff. In those tunes in particular.
And that's kind of the direction I know that Swana wanted them to go. I mean, if you read the Decibel Hall of Fame that
a friend of ours, Chris who's been on the podcast a few times.
For Brave Murder Day, he basically kind of threw his hands up and said, I'm done with this. If you're going to go this direction, then I don't want any part of it.
Yeah, and it just seems like they were really going through a heavy goth phase at that point, because that's exactly the same time that they recorded Scarlet Heavens, which didn't show up on War Comp, but will come later on Saw You Drown EP.
He was on a 10-inch originally.
Was that what it was?
Yeah.
Okay. And so they go from the War compilation, which they did those tunes in like June of 94, and then they go back to the studio a couple months later to record the infamous For Funerals to Come EP, which is really, I guess, the last recording of the original Katatonia era. This is sort of where...
That's the last time, Jonas is on doing his, death vocals.
Yeah, and he, the band kind of walk away after For Funerals to Come, and we're going to hear a song from it in a moment, but I guess we want to talk about this sort of like in-between era of what was sort of going on.
This was when, is this when like Bewitched started up?
Yeah, this is definitely when Anders went and was doing, he started his own single-man project, which was Diabolical Masquerade, and then he did some guest things on the first
October Tide, The Rain Without End came out right around this time too, didn't it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And October Tide's a really interesting band that very predictive of
that's
what
where Frederick
Norman comes from. And it's almost predictive of what the style that they're going to use on Brave Murder Day. You can almost tell that the kind of guitar tones that Frederick Norman was playing on the first October Tide.
And I'd have to look at the lineup or liner notes on that. I'm not sure how much of that he wrote and how much Jonas wrote.
Yeah, I think Jonas wrote quite a bit of it, but I have a feeling that Norman's just his style of playing.
Well, he's a lot more skilled player than
he just came in to Brave Murder Day and just sort of brought that same exact style.
It's always been weird that Anders has always been more of like the heavy metal guy.
Sure, he's more flashy.
But yet he still writes this stuff. It's kind of like really weird to me. Yeah. Because you look at Diabolical Masquerade and it's like such a like these really pompous
over the top. Yeah, exactly.
Really weird stuff. And then to go back to, I can see where there'd be some butting heads at that point.
And I think, again, we talk about how young these guys were when they started off. I mean, obviously they're really searching for an image, and I don't think they found it with Dance. I think after Dance they realized we're not going to be a black metal band. I don't think we really want to be a goth metal band, so let's just take some time off. And I think I remember hearing, if they officially kind of said, wow, I think Katatonia is done.
It was a good 2 years between records, 2.5 years.
And the EP that they put out, for a lot of people, including I'm sure you guys, when you guys got a hold of this, you probably thought, oh well, this is it, and it was
news traveled slower back then.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
There wasn't speculation on blogs and things.
And again, you guys probably didn't know the potential of Katatonia, so you guys probably weren't the number one fans that you guys became, years down the road with these guys. But For Funerals to Come has a lot of really interesting musical things, especially the song we're going to hear, Funeral Wedding, which is kind of the epic song. It's 8.5 minutes long. What kind of things were you hearing? Because I know it was a little bit different than what I was.
Yeah, because you were kind of coming from the aspect of hearing Opeth first.
I was hearing a lot of Opeth, Morning Rise, and Orchid stuff going on.
Which I didn't catch it all until now that you say it. Because I've always been an Opeth fan, but not like the Uber fan, like a lot of people.
Like Chris and I guess, yeah.
Yeah. So I was just hearing more of like taking the whole Paradise Lost formula to the next level. Like this is what I wish. This is what should have came after Gothic. Yeah. Kind of thing, like that kind of style. But now you go back and listen to it, and there's a lot of the Opeth progressive elements.
It's just weird. I mean, even some of like the drum choices, and even like some of Jonas's like kind of like extended screams that Michael did on Orchid and Morning Rise and things like that. So if you like those first two Opeth records, because to me those first two Opeth records had their own kind of like mystical quality, and then they kind of got their direction, and they've never really gone back to that style of sound, I guess, that super melodic.
Yeah, I think the first two Opeth records are probably my favorites.
Same here.
I mean, the new stuff's great, but I don't see myself throwing it back on. I mean, the new record's fantastic, Watershed, but I think they finally... They took a more mainstream approach to songwriting, chorus verse kind of stuff, and it seems to make more sense now.
Yeah, I would agree.
It wasn't just like some of the other stuff seemed like overindulgent.
Yeah, and that's kind of part of what I guess the appeal. But Mark's definitely never been the overindulgent metalhead, like Chris and I can be sometimes. But and so again, this was recorded with Swano, and so listen for those kind of elements, because this is essentially taking the Dance of December Soul style, but throwing a lot more, I guess, progressive things and a lot more kind of. There's almost some like guitar flares going on. There is, and
there's even like some bluesiness to the leads. It's kind of weird.
And there's a tune that we don't have time to play, Shades of Emerald Fields, which has, I mean, it's like 10 different bands kind of thrown in one. There's like a whole like chugga like doom metal like breakdown with some pinch harmonics that My Dying Bride did. There's like this sort of
it almost mystical, seems like this is it. We're gonna throw everything.
Yeah, it's a very much a
there's a lot of like
kitchen sink record.
I don't think they've ever gone back to where they've done this many different movements.
No,
throughout, and that many hooks within one song.
And I think again that's maybe why I pick up on the Opeth thing, because Opeth or Katatonia, for a lot of people, and I think this is, if you don't get Katatonia, this is maybe the element you're missing, is that it's what Katatonia doesn't do that makes them such a powerful band. They're very much a minimalist kind of, you know, I mean, they're not about flashy solos, which is what you were talking about.
It's all about tonality. It's all about creating a mood, I think, more so than anything else. And using, like, what they'll do later on is using, like, these really discordant riffs, but still have that noodling kind of, you know, those doom riffs, those My Dying Bride style riffs.
Well, and you're going to hear that in this set, because we're going to kind of take it from Funeral Wedding, which represents kind of the For Funerals to Come EP, and then, of course, they disappear for 2 years. They get back in the studio in 96 with Swano again, and this is where they're going to do Brave Murder Day, and we'll talk more about Brave Murder Day when we come back, and because again it's sort of like a famous story about what goes on between them and Swano, and if you've read Decibel you kind of know a little bit about it, but you're going to hear these elements of like flashiness on Funeral Wedding, and then you're going to hear like the same sort of epic scope in terms of songwriting, but just totally taking out all the dynamicism of like songwriting and just like doing discordant, sorrowful.
It almost has the same drum beat the entire record.
Yeah, and it's very drony at times. You know, I mean,
it's the Sisters of Mercy school where it's basically just, you know, kick, drum, and snare, just do the whole thing.
And we were commenting that the Jonas as a drummer, very raw.
Yeah, he's not playing with a click track. He's not necessarily in time, but he's playing with the feel. And I know Anders he's always like spot on. We tried. I don't know if we've probably mentioned this story before, but a friend of mine, we used to play this. Like, he used to work at a guitar store, and we'd set up and try to play End Time,
which we'll hear later in the show.
It's impossible to play in time. So I think it helps that the Anders was so on technically that Jonas could add more of this flavor and a little bit of this improvisation, I think.
Yeah, and maybe that's, you know, it's I don't know, it's a cool drum sound, and it, like, again, I think people either kind of get this or they don't. You know, I don't think there's any in between Katatonia fans. You know,
it's probably love it or hate it.
Lukewarm people about it. So. But let's get back to some music here. We're going to hear Funeral Wedding from the For Funerals to Come EP, and then, like I said, the 2-year break, and then they kind of jump back out. And this is the first Katatonia song I ever heard, actually, is Brave from Brave Murder Day. Enjoy.
Glorious taste of us.
You just heard Brave and Funeral Wedding from older Katatonia stuff here. And we talked a lot about the For Funerals to Come EP and how they took a break and then they kind of came back with this totally, just a completely new sound that you hadn't, I mean, you heard maybe hints of it on Dance of December Souls and For Funerals to Come and some of that, but no one could prepare themselves, I guess, for this, like, these minor chords and all this disharmonic.
They kind of stripped it down to the bare elements of what it took to get that tone out. But yeah, the death vocals were gone. Leads for the most part are gone or buried in wall of noise kind of stuff.
Well, and I think the other thing too is whereas you heard like Jonas's most brutal sort of vocal performance, like on Dance of December Soul, like especially like some of those screams on Without God and things like that. Obviously it had taken a toll on his voice, and the last time you hear him sing kind of the death stuff is on like Funeral Wedding, For Funerals to Come, the War Comp stuff that was recorded back in '94. Clearly he kind of went through the same kind of thing that like Nick Holmes from Paradise Lost went through, where he just said, I'm shredding my voice, I can't do this kind of stuff anymore. And so wasn't it that they were kind of gonna do it in the studios and his vocals just weren't holding up, and that's when they contacted Michael from Opeth?
I don't even remember now.
I seem to recall or want to recall that's part of the reason why it wasn't like intentional, like, hey, let's just call Michael and have him sing on a record just for the hell of it. I think it was kind of like an 11th hour thing, I seem to recall, but again, I haven't read that Decibel issue in a couple years, and Chris is probably going to get really upset if we misquote him here. But it was something along those lines. But anyways, as I'm sure you notice as a listener who's maybe hearing this stuff for the first time, that was a different vocalist, and it's clearly Michael from Opeth doing probably his most brutal work. I mean, he's like so over the top on a lot of this stuff. It's he's almost trying purposely to have no melody and just totally discordant against the music. It's almost
as monotonous as the music is.
Yeah. And there's some like just utter kind of explosions of like that you're gonna hear later on, like on Murder and End Time, that are just guttural to the bone. But it's all sort of this aesthetic that they really have, I feel like, comes together for the first time on this record. Both visually, both musically, both lyrically. It's just, it has this aura to it that the first two things that we were kind of listening to didn't really have.
No, I think this is where they first kind of like got their ground and kind of figured out who they were to some degree.
Yeah, and maybe taking those 2 years off, I think did a lot for them to sort of get on that path. But this is the first Katatonia I had, and I remember going to the record store, to New Moon Records, where Mark and I eventually worked. But this is when I was still in high school, and Chris was working. And he was just sort of said, "Listen, if you like, Opeth, Michael from Opeth singing in this band, have you heard Katatonia?" And I'm like, "No." And he said, "Check it out. This is awesome." And I think maybe I had heard those Katatonia songs from War Comp. I think I may have heard them prior to Brave Murder Day, but I really. They didn't like hit me real hard, because I think when I bought War Comp, or was listening to War Comp, I was into Dark Tranquillity and In Flames and Dissection, and Katatonia was sort of just this atmospheric kind of thing at the end of the record. But just by the album cover, this sort of purple toned photograph of
monotone with this like a rotten bird on the front of it,
and then Brave Murder Day, and the first track's Brave, second track Murder, third track Day. I mean, it was just it was so utterly minimalist, and as an artist, being an artist, I mean, this had to impress you too from an artistic standpoint.
It's one of those rare times when the cover actually represents what you're about to experience inside.
And this is also when to me, Katatonia is about to make this run of album covers that are just going to be almost untouched. I can't really think of another band that has put together a more consistent sort of visual image from the mid '90s till now.
Yeah, and I'd have to look again, but I think it's from Tonight's Decision on is when Travis Smith came on to do all the art for him.
But I mean, this one, and then the Saw You Drown EP, which is just so like this mesmerizing blue, and then the Discouraged one cover, which has its own unique kind of cool quality.
And we should mention
the angel wings.
They dropped the logo.
Yeah, not at this point.
Not at this point.
Brave Murder Day, it's the last record. I think this and Sounds of Decay, which is the EP that follows, are going to be the last places that you find the pentagram black metal kind of
cool logo in its own right. But
I mean, it's almost impossible to read if you don't know what you're supposed to be looking for, But this song Brave especially kind of cinches in my head, because this is essentially the first kind of Katatonia song I kind of have memory of. And I remember really trying to figure this record out for a long time, and it kind of came in different waves and different patterns, and I think that's true of this era of Katatonia for a lot of people. I mean, you mentioned that you found it strange that some people got into this record. You said Chris in particular, because he usually didn't go or gravitate towards maybe the discordant, minimalistic kind of stuff. But this seemed to have that like mass appeal for all kinds of people.
Yeah, it was kind of a shift in metal at that time. It's almost like an art house record to some degree.
Yeah.
Like people that didn't even really particularly like death metal that much, or somehow like gravitated toward this. And
I remember like there were people like girls that I used to hang out with who thought this album was actually like beautiful. And it is
really honest. Yeah.
It is, because if you get past how over the top Michael's vocals are, I mean, the drums are super simplistic, and they're really sort of like laying out almost like pop beats sometimes,
Yeah.
And the shimmering kind of wall of guitars and the shoegazer kind of aspects that they're sort of throwing in here, it's all over the place. And if you we're not quoting Decibel like per se, but a more academic or a more like detailed point of view on how they made this record and what they were thinking about, you should definitely check out the Hall of Fame thing, because it's going to go a lot further than you and I would be able to.
Or we have time to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. So, but just the aesthetic, I guess this is really where I think Katatonia came into their own with the aesthetic, and between this and the Sounds of Decay EP that follows, which Michael from Opeth sings on as well. It's just a cool. I mean, it's my favorite Katatonia record, I think. Although it's really hard to like sort of compare this era compared to where they're at now.
They've almost gone through these we've got this, and then like the Scourged ones, it's kind of like its own like milestone. And then even with Less for a Deal, I mean, those are like three, like it's amazing that one band put that many fantastic records out.
In a row,
let alone
too.
all the other stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Well, not in a row. I'm sorry. I always forget about Tonight's Decision. Kind of popped right in between them.
Yeah, and that was always when I was down at Relapse. I worked there for about a year or so, and I remember Jeff Wagner was a huge Katatonia fan, purely based on the fact that they start out this black, like how much they changed each record, and then when Tonight's Decision came out, that kind of lost them. Because it wasn't enough of a jump.
It wasn't enough of a jump.
Yeah.
And we'll get into all that stuff in the next one, because we've sort of made that same observation about some of the later stuff from Katatonia as well. But, the thing about this record, too, that, again, if you go and read the Decibel stuff, is how unimpressed Dan Swano was when they recorded this. He hated the sound of it. And I think, in fact, he kind of refused to master it, or he just wasn't really interested in doing it.
That almost added to it.
And I guess they accidentally sent it away to be pressed without it ever really having that sort of finishing touches. And so it's kind of one of those happy accidents and those kind of miracles.
This is on Avant-Garde, wasn't it?
Yeah, this is where they've just joined Avant-Garde, because I think previously For Funerals to Come was on Nuclear Blast East-West. Is at least Avant-Garde.
Yeah,
that must have been who was licensed.
The first one was on Vic. Now we had Voices of Wonder, and then we go to Avant-Garde, I think.
Yeah. So I think this one was No Fashion. At least my version.
No Fashion. That's right.
Yeah. So, but again, it just adds that sort of mysterious element to this record, and there's more mysteries to come as well, and we'll share one with you when we get into the next talk set about our first live performance at Katatonia we saw. It was very unique. So, but we're going to kind of get into another tune, probably the most well-known song from this record. It's the only one that they still play live. It's Murder. And this features a riff that, in particular...
Yeah, just that opening discordant riff that almost goes on like 3 measures too long. It just sets this really uneasy tone, for this whole song.
It's definitely like something, if you throw that in a car with kind of pop music fans, they're definitely going to be on edge a little bit. And then we're going to kind of drift into the Sounds of Decay EP, which Dan Swano didn't produce. It was actually Skogsberg Studios and Fred Etzby from Dismember that did this record, or EP. It's a 3-song EP, and it's a much more sort of, I guess, polished version of the Brave Murder Day song. It's kind of softer, kind of like warmer tones.
I think it almost has, it could owe a little bit back to For Funerals to Come. It's almost got more of that kind of sound like, you know, a little bit more mature.
Yeah, and I don't know if they choose the EPs to sort of have these like jumps of experimentation, or just to sort of like fine tune what they had done on the previous record. Because in a way, For Funerals to Come is a commentary on Dance of December Souls. This seems like a commentary on Brave Murder Day. Mm-hmm. You know, excuse me. So, and then we're gonna end things with, appropriately enough, End Time, and we'll talk a little bit about that song when we come back. heard End Time, Inside the Fall, and Murder. And one of the things, too, Mark and I were kind of talking in between the break, and Mark finally was able to text Chris and kind of pick his brain about where the two of you guys actually encountered Katatonia for the first time.
Yeah, it basically came back. I mean, it's similar to what I said before, but it's from Mortician Magazine, a Dutch fanzine. And I think after reading about it in there, we ordered it through Relapse mail order. Ended up picking up Dance of December Souls, $20. Probably plus shipping.
Back in the day, metal imports, I'm sure that's close to what I paid.
I paid nothing under 18 for most of the stuff that I originally got.
So. Yeah, I think Bray Murder Day, I don't even know, because I have the avant-garde version. It was probably $17-18 back in the day.
Surprised. Yeah, because we got all that stuff imported as well.
Yeah.
Before Century Media.
Pre-internet.
A lot of that stuff.
Pre-internet.
I barely sold any of it off, so
yeah, no, it's
yeah. And then after that, it was just a matter of a lot of tape trading as well. So
with Dan Zadar,
the
where
tape trading
today,
king of
my friend.
He's on MySpace.
Is he?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, Dan Zadar. Is some of you old school people? That's a blast from the past. So, but thank you, Chris, for that. The song we just heard there, End Time, that. Mark and I were talking before we did the show, and for Mark and myself, I think it's probably the song. To me, that's probably the Katatonia song I've heard the most.
Yeah.
Or played the most.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like I just walked into a bar and heard End Time. It was by choice that I've.
Well, that could have been the last song they ever wrote, and I'd have been happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's
at least for that era, it kind of like bookended it really nicely.
For sure, and it really the song itself sort of deconstructs. It constructs at the beginning. I mean, it's just sort of massive, kind of like it starts so melodic and soft and kind of just builds and builds and builds until Michael's scream just pummels at about the 2-minute mark. And that's after you hear like a little undertone of a sample from The Shining, which for years neither of us even knew was there. I think I caught it on the internet one day and was like, what? It's The Shining? Oh, crap. That's Jack Nicholson.
We should mention, too, that reissue that came out of... on Brave Murder Day. Do you remember who put that out?
I don't, because
I think it came
Chris
out
sent a copy to us, but
they actually it's supposedly the polished version or the produced version of the album. What they end up cutting 2 minutes off?
Yeah, it's like a 4-minute verthen of End Time, and it's just something not right. Yeah, because at the end of the song kind of unravels in a way, and it's what kind of and then it cuts. I mean, it's almost an uncomfortable cut, which is the first time Katatonia does that. They'll do it later, like on Omerta and some other tunes, almost to sort of like that unease,
that Battles in the North quick stop, Immortal cuts.
Or Serenity Painted Death that Opeth did, where Michael wanted to take something that was beautiful and just slice it at the weirdest moment, But if memory serves right, the first time we saw Katatonia, this was a hell of a metal fest.
It was 2000, wasn't it?
I think it was the 2000 Metal Fest, and this was the first time I think you also saw Anathema, Opeth, and Katatonia. And I know it was the first time, I think all three of those bands played the U.S.
It's the first time, I think that was the first time Katatonia had ever been in the U.S. I don't know about the other guys.
Anathema, yeah.
Okay.
For sure, because I remember talking to Vincent. I remember he said it's been too long, since we've done this. But the weirdest part about that show, and those scant few of you out there that maybe were there, who knows? But I tell this story to people, and it kind of adds to the allure of End Time, I think, because when we were there, Jonas was clearly uncomfortable as a frontman at that point. He wouldn't stare at the crowd at all. When he sang, he either closed his eyes or he stared up at the ceiling. When he wasn't singing, he would close his eyes and put the microphone in between his eyes, kind of.
Yeah,
and just
I got a bunch of photos of
I mean, just really, really kind of creepy stuff. You could really sense his unease, and of course lyrically that fits totally with the sound and the everything about Katatonia is about sorrow and pain and depression, and he was living it on stage, and so it was just made for a really weird thing. And
it was almost like a more natural version of what Aaron from My Dying Bride does, his whole agony thing, and basically like kind of falling all over the place when he's singing. But
except I feel like that's more of like a great theater performance, and this just seemed like really too real, and it
seemed like a guy with like social anxiety syndrome or something.
And so what happened is the sound was really horrible in this room, and Opeth had really struggled with it, and Katatonia struggled with it as well, and so he couldn't hit some of the notes.
I don't think he had a monitor either.
Yeah, and so it was very, very difficult, and so we didn't really know what to expect, and there was kind of this hope that, oh my God, Opeth's here. We had kind of hinted that maybe Michael will come out and sing sing a Brave Murder Day song. You know, I mean, it almost kind of seemed appropriate because no one had heard Jonas do death vocals since '94, since Funerals to Come,
and they didn't really ever tour very much.
Exactly, and so we didn't really know what to expect, and so the show was basically over, and they're like, we got one more. And then those opening chords of End Time started, and I think we were all kind of like, what the, you know, what's going to happen here? And when that first scream comes in at the 2-minute mark, I almost remember the front of the crowd like being moved backwards almost by like the fierceness of it. And there was such an intensity built around that song, and you could just tell the social anxiety was building. He was just like letting it all out with these just vicious screams and stuff. And at the very end of the song, when his part is done, there's still about a minute and a half left of music for it to kind of unravel. He like ran off stage and was trying to get out the backstage door to vomit because he was so, I mean, you know, I'll never forget that. I remember going home, and I think I listened to End Time like 12 times in a row on headphones. I just said, whoa, like my head was really into that song. So in particular, it's kind of a, you know, I think the reason why I listen to that song so much is just sort of sears that memory.
Yeah, it built up so much like mystery and, you know, stigma around this thing is, and plus it was like one of those few times, like, you know, with Paradise Lost, everybody wants Nick Holmes to come out and sing one song in death metal, you know, death metal vocals, and that was just like,
and there was no expectation with Katatonia because they never played here. They never really played live much. They weren't a live band, you know, and so it was really weird for sure. But anyhow, to kind of close things out with part one of our Katatonia show tonight, we want to get into, or at least introduce something to you, which is the sort of next level of Katatonia. And this is where Jonas comes back and starts using the clean style vocals for the first time. And this came out on the Saw You Drown EP, was the first example of this. I mean, I guess you can say, you know, he sang on Day.
But that's pretty understated.
Yeah, very understated. But it was sort of a hint as to what they were going to do on Discouraged Ones and the Saw You Drown EP. Now again, another magical story is the Saw You Drown EP. I'll let Mark sort of say.
Yeah, it was limited to 1,500 copies. I ended up getting copy like I think 667 or something. But
it's a kind of cool number.
Yeah, and I think in the United States there's only maybe 10 copies of it that floated around or something. I mean, it's
we had 4.
Yeah, we had
New Moon
4.
Records. I mean, that just shows where
there wasn't a whole lot shot over here. And yeah, I managed to snag one, Chris, and then 2 other people that.
And one of them, 2 of them, not me. Let's put it that way. I think I was
it's
just.
Been the one that got away for you for a long time.
Exactly. I was still in high school. You know, that and War Comp are like my 2. I think I already told the story about War Comp, how it just sat in the shelves at the record store, and I was like, I don't need it. I'll pick it up.
Yeah, another guy that worked with us at the record store, Brian. He was always just like, anytime he come over, he just want to look at it.
Yeah, like touch it.
What do you want for
like
it?
Feel it.
I'm not selling it. Sorry.
So I still don't have a copy of this except for a copy I burned off of Mark, and I know they put this stuff out on the Brave Yesterdays compilation a couple years back, which is totally worth getting if you have trouble getting hold of this stuff for some reason, but you shouldn't at this point. I think most of it's back in print, other than the Saw You Drown EP.
Yeah, but basically all their stuff I think is available in one form or another.
Exactly. But this is the title track from the Saw You Drown EP, and this is one that really hooked me back into the band, because I think Brave Murder Day just seemed to me like a one-off. Like I didn't really know what to ever expect from this band again. And then Chris, introduced this to me. He said, "This is totally new." Like, and it could have been a different band, for all it was worth. I mean, the logo's changed, the visual scope of it's changed, the music's changed.
They kept the tonality, and that's about it.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a nice way to end the show, and we'll certainly talk a little bit more about this sound in part 2. So. Again, if you have comments about the early Katatonia stuff, please feel free to shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com, or leave some comments on iTunes or
subscribe through iTunes. That'd be great.
There you
Tell
go.
a friend.
Hey, it's free. So for Jason
and Mark,
enjoy Saw You Drown.
Together, and your heart Another way to change your mind. I'm weaker than they say. To leave this all behind, but only when you stay. Don't you know I'm the end of what you did, and right below us, the last things you will say. In the water, I saw you drown, down the water, I saw you drown. Oh, in the water, I saw you drown. Down the water, I saw you drown. That's through my childhood fire.